Thank you for joining the session. My name's Andy Turner. I've also got my colleague Joe Beach-Brandt here with me, who's going to help out with this presentation. What we're planning to do today is give an introduction to the ARCHER2 system. In particular, we're going to focus on what it's going to look like, what it looks like to get on the system in terms of how accounts will work, logging in, how resources will be transferred across, and those sorts of logistical details. Joe's going to talk about that in the first part of the presentation. And then we're going to look at the differences from the 4-cabinet system, which most people have been using for the past wee while. So just in terms of the presentation, just a slide to say, feel free to use this material. These are the ARCHER2 partners, the people actually providing the service. So it's funded by UKRI, particularly EPSRC and the Natural Environment Research Council. The system is hosted by EPCC and the University of Edinburgh, and the hardware, the actual ARCHER2 system itself, is provided by HPE. So this is what I just said earlier on, is that we're going to look at the onboarding process for users and projects and what that means, the sort of logistical stuff of getting onto the system, which we hope to have available for users sometime early next week, hopefully Monday the 22nd, if all goes to plan. And then we'll talk a bit about the differences from the 4-cabinet ARCHER2 system, which many people have been using so far. Just wanted to note that in the last day or so, ARCHER2 has made it onto the top 500 list of supercomputers. So you can see there it sits at number 22 in the full list. It's actually the 5th largest non-accelerated system in the world. So that's a system that doesn't use either GPU accelerators of some sort, or custom accelerator chips. And it's also currently the largest system in the UK. These are the systems in the UK at the moment, in the top 500 list, or the top 5 of them anyway. So Nathan's asked what time on Monday is expected we'll be able to log in and submit jobs. We're not 100% sure because there's still some final testing to be done over the next 2 days, but we will let people know as soon as we know exactly what's going on there. So that's just where we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step back and hand over to Joe, who's going to talk about the sort of logistical stuff around transition to the full system. And I will keep my role as slide operator, Joe. So just tell me when you want the slides advanced, and I'll move on to the next one for you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I work on the Archer user support team on the help desk there. So if we're available and ready to answer all of your queries once we open the service on Monday. But hopefully this will help reduce the number of questions that users may have. So first of all, we've tried to make it as easy for you as possible. The projects that are currently live on the 4-cabinet system have all been transferred over to the full system. So when you do log in, your project codes will be exactly the same as what you see on the 4-cabinet system. The compute unit that you've all been using on the 4-cabinet is also being transferred onto the full system. The compute unit, as you may be aware, is approximately 1 ARCHER2 node hours, and that will be used across both systems. Starting on Monday, there will be a period of at least 30 days where you will have access to both of the systems. So you will have access to the full system and also to the 4-cabinet system. There will be a period where the full system will be uncharged, and that will start on Monday, but during this time the 4-cabinet system will be charged. I see Nathan's just added about midnight on Sunday. Sorry, when I said start of the day, I meant the start of the working hours of the ARCHER2 service, which is 8 AM to 6 PM. So when we talk about our working day, that's normally the time. I hope not to be sending a user mail in at midnight on Sunday night. Okay, so So this initial 30-day period where users have access to both systems, the full system will be uncharged. The full cabinet will still be charged as usual. The uncharged period is currently scheduled to end on January 4th, but this will be confirmed by UKRI ahead of that. Okay. So again, to try and make it as easy a transition as possible for our users, your current accounts on the full cabinet system have been migrated to the full system. So you will have the same username, same password, and same SSH key that you currently use on the ARCHER2 full cabinet. There is, you may recall, recently we switched the name of the full cabinet system from login.archer2.ac.uk to login-4c archer2.ac.uk. This was so that we could use that login.archer2.ac.uk as the address for the main full system. So that's the main system address that you'll use to log in, and you continue to use the login-4c address for the full cabinet. One important note here though, we have changed the ordering of the credentials for when you connect to the full system. So currently on the full cabinet system, when you connect, you're asked for your 2 factors to authenticate. The first one you enter is your machine account password, and the second one you enter is the passphrase for your SSH key pair. Now on the full system, you will be asked for your passphrase for the SSH key pair first, and then your machine account password. This is just seen as a better way for the security protocols to work this. Okay, so please do remember that. I just wanted to note this, that as I say, we did switch the name of Login ARCHER2 from the full cabinet to the full system. So when you first connect, you may see something like this warning, just saying that it's a possible spoofing, because they know that the DNS has changed for that for the IP address. So if you do see that, don't be alarmed. You can go in and remove the entry yourself from your .ssh/known host file. But if you've got any concerns about it, please do contact us at the service desk and we'll be able to advise. We'll put that up as a kind of a known issue. It's in the documentation. So if you do see it, just be aware of how to quickly resolve that.
You mentioned the passphrase. Actually, I'm not asked for a passphrase at the moment. I'm just asked for a password.
So do you have some kind of SSH agent in place?
Well, I don't know. I just use SSH and no login name and then password. That's all I enter to log in.
So if you're on a Mac, Dario, it automatically runs an SSH agent for you. So the first time you ever did it, you probably were asked for your passphrase, and then it's never asked you again because the Mac's just integrated agents automatically.
Okay, that might be the case then. Thank you.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the file system. So as you may be aware, there are 3 file systems associated with the ARCHER2 service. There's the home file system, work file system, and then for the non-NERC users, there's also the RDF as a service file system. So taking the whole home file system initially, this is available on both systems. So if you log into the full cabinet or the full system, you will see your home directories. They will be there. They're readable and writable on both of the services. So you'll see them exactly as they appear on both systems, and everything's fine. You don't need to do anything for your home file system. The work file system does require user action, if you like. There are different work file systems for the full cabinet and the full system. At the moment, the full cabinet has a quarter of the total work file system there, and that was attached to the full cabinet in this transition period. that will remain there until the full cabinet is switched off, and then it will be moved and connected to the full system. But we do ask users to move any data they wish to keep from the work file system that is on the full cabinet system. You will need to move this yourself to the full system. Now you have a new work file system on the full cabinet system that you can transition. You can move the data from there. The quota will typically be twice the quota as it was on the full cabinet system, so you should have plenty of space to move the data across. But please do bear in mind that you have to move this data yourself. There will be, like I mentioned, you've got the 30-day period where you've got access to both systems, and that's the time really to be moving the data across if possible. Yes, I have, on the next slide, I'll show you, we've made a web page with some examples, so it'll be much easier to transition the data. And just quickly then, the RDF as a service file system, that's available, same as the home file system. You don't need to do anything for that. It will just appear on both systems. Okay. So yeah, there we go. So yeah, so to migrate the data, you need to have the accounts on both systems, which everybody should do. And we've set this up so that you only need one form of authentication to connect from the full cabinet system to the full system. So your password should suffice here. There's no SSH key required. And we've got examples of using rsync and SCP, which you can find at that web link there. Okay, I think it's easier if you just go, you can even cut and paste the command exactly. I think if you go to the next slide, Andy, thanks. Yep. So just in conclusion, really for me, I just wanted to give a quick overview about these logistics. We've got all this information and more at that website there. And please, as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, please do contact us on the service desk next week. We are primed. We think it could be a busy week, but we're ready and willing to help you in any way that we can to make this as seamless as possible for people. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Right. So in this next section, I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the differences between the full cabinet system and the main system are, and there were some questions that came up there that I'm going to touch on in here as well around recompiling codes, about the scheduler setup and configuration and those sorts of things. So just a reminder, in case, because it's been quite a long time now since we've been waiting for the full system, and I'm sure people maybe haven't forgotten exactly what it's like, but to give you a quick reminder, some details on the slide here. I won't go for everything in detail. Essentially, it's just over 5,800 compute nodes. So with 128 cores per node, that gives just over 750,000 CPU compute cores on the system. So it is a lot larger than the full cabinet system, which is just over 1,000 nodes in total. It's got the same interconnect, the same processors and memory setup, that the full cab system has, apart from the fact that it also has these high memory nodes, which I'll mention in a bit more detail. So they've got twice as much memory as the nodes you're used to on the full cabinet system, up to 512 gigabytes. As Joe's mentioned, we've got more work file systems, so there's 3 of them at the moment plugged into the Lustre file systems plugged into the main system. There is also this 1 petabyte of solid state storage. Now, this isn't available straight away on day one, but is a thing that's being worked on to get into service as soon as possible from following the start of the full system. And then the other, these NetApp file systems at the end are the home file systems. I see Mark's asked, would adding 4 more cabinets move Archer up in the top 500? Actually, The submission we put in for the top 500, even with the system as it is, with the 23 cabinets of the full system, we could do better because it was just a short HPL run. If we'd taken a longer time on the system, then we could have potentially got a higher number, but actually there wasn't time to do that and still get it into service for users, which is obviously more important than exactly where we are on the top 500 list. Gavin asks if there are going to be GPU nodes. So there will be in the future a small development part of ARCHER2, which will have access to some AMD GPUs. We don't quite know the timescale for that yet from HPE. We're working on finalizing that, but don't expect a huge number. This is a really a system where you could test compiling codes and see how well they run on a small number of GPUs. It's not planned to be a sort of production level GPU system. It's just to give people a chance to explore that type of technology, because the AMD GPU technology is quite new and isn't as readily accessible to people as say NVIDIA. Gnome asks, was there an ETA for the solid state storage? There isn't at the moment, because there's been so much focus on getting the full system into service that's sort of been parked just for the moment while we work. Well, ourselves and HPE have worked very hard to get this initial release of the system going, but we will keep users updated with that as soon as we get a chance to focus on it more. Mike's asking the cost for the 256 12 gig nodes. The same? Yes, they are. So all costs on ARCHER2 are the same, essentially. You're charged for NCUs, and one CU is equal to one node hour, no matter which type of node you're using. So there's a table here with some comparisons. Some of them I've mentioned already. The other things that I haven't mentioned are that the module system is changing a bit on this 4-cabinet system. The modules you load come from TCL and modules 4, and we're moving to Lmod on the full system because it gives them more flexibility. And actually, it is a simpler system to use in lots of ways with the Cray programming environment that we've got on the system. The default program environment jumps forward quite a lot from the October 2020 release to the April 2021 release. The September 2021 release is also available in the system as non-default for the moment. We've chosen that to give as close continuity as we can between the two systems in terms of the default programming environment. We didn't want to jump even further ahead. And that means that compilers have jumped ahead a few versions. Finally, singularity containers are available. It's a more recent version of singularity on the system. And there's an and the RDF file system, as Joe mentioned, is already there. The other thing that's on the full system when you log in is access to the serial nodes, the data analysis nodes. That'll be there, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Scott's asking, will members of my project have an account on the 4-cabinet system need to recognize ARCHER2 that I need to approve? No. Anyone who has a current account on the 4-cabinet system in a project that has resources has automatically been transferred. And they will have the same username, password, and SSH key as they had on the 4-cabinet system. So you use exactly the same credentials to log in to the two systems. So there's no need to approve any extra accounts. So the key differences, I think talked about mostly. That's just a resume of the last slide. The scheduler has been expanded. I'll talk about a bit more detail about that. Some changes, some little syntax changes. One is you don't need the reservation short QoS. We're using the short QoS on the full system because we've changed the setup to make it simpler to use, and that similarly, there's no need on the full system for module load EPCC job env in job scripts. We've simplified the process, the setup of Slurm and the way it works, so this extra step isn't needed anymore. In terms of the program environment, the key differences are the default versions change, which I mentioned. One thing, if you're used to loading various modules, some software library modules are hidden by default due to dependencies. So, for example, the Cray netcdf modules aren't visible. You can't just do a module load Cray netcdf because they depend on HDF5 modules. You need to load the HDF5 modules first and then load the Cray netcdf modules. So the module software module layout is a bit more hierarchical under Lmod than it was under TCL. The two MPI transport layers, which do exist on the 4-cabinet system, but we've always recommended on the 4-cabinet system that people use the Open Fabrics layer, OFI, and occasionally use UCX if OFI isn't working for some reason, and in particular cases. Actually, on the full system, UCX is more promoted to a sort of a more first-class citizen, and it's worth trying both out. The default is OFI, but switching to UCX can have a positive impact on performance. I do have some data on performance for a few applications, which I've presented at a few previous in a separate presentation before, and the situation is reasonably complicated. There's not a simple piece of advice I can offer you, because some codes benefit a lot, some codes OFI is better, and some codes it actually makes little difference. So you do, if you want to explore this, it is something that needs tried almost on a case-to-case basis at the moment anyway, at least from the understanding we have so far. But you don't need to recompile to try these different options. You can use the module commands in your job submission script to switch between the different MPI transport layers, and just do that to check rather than having to recompile. So it is quite low overhead to actually do a quick test if you want to do that. As I mentioned a couple of times, we moved to Lmod. Many commands in Lmod are the same as the ones you're used to on the 4-cabinet system. So things like module load, module swap, and module avail, module removal, all of those work in the same sort of way as you'd expect from using the 4-cab. There are some new commands. Module spider is the command that allows you to search for modules that are hidden, like the netcdf one. So if you want to know which versions of netcdf are available, but you can't see them because you haven't loaded the HDF5 module, you can use module spider to do that. And it will also tell you which modules you need to load to make the hidden module available to you. Okay, so it's a command that sort of looks through the whole catalog of modules rather than just the ones that are currently available for you to load, which is what module avail does. There's a module restore command, but it isn't the same as the module restore command you're used to the 4-cab. It doesn't take any options. So it is just module restore, not module restore program GNU, program cray, or whatever, just module restore. And that's a way to reset to the default environment from when you logged in. Okay, so in TCL, often the easiest way to get back to the default environment was to actually log off and log back in again. In Lmod, if you use just module restore on its own, and that just resets your environment back to what it was. So that's quite a useful feature. The module restore commands themselves for changing program environments are no longer available. We're back to the way that people who remember from Archer used to do it, which was module swap or module load to load the different program environments. We're back to that situation again. So, for example, to switch from the default, which is program cray, to the GNU programming environment, you would just issue module load program GNU. Okay, not using the restore command as you do on a 4-cabinet system. You can also use, of course, module swap program cray to program GNU, but the module system, the Lmod module system, is clever enough to work out that if you say module load program GNU, what you actually need to do is unload the cray environment first to make the GNU one available. And so it saves a bit of typing if you use the module load version. I mentioned about the dependent modules already. If you look at the user, you can look at the user guide right now for the software environment for the full system, and it has more details on these different commands and examples of how to use them and how they work for the different programming environments and different modules available. I mentioned a moment ago about the different transport layers. And like I say, you can switch between them very simply using the module commands with no need to recompile. Often, if you're switching between different transport layers, it's useful to add the LDD command on your executable, or LDD, the name of the executable you're using, to check that the executable really is using the UCX versions and there isn't a typo in the script somewhere or something's gone wrong, just to make sure you're using the one you think you're using. What we're going to do is, as we get more and more time with the full system, we've only had limited time at the moment, we're going to try and provide some more specific advice on different applications about whether to choose OFI, UCX, in what cases, at what sizes. But I think like I say, from the testing we've done so far, the answer is mostly it's complicated. So it may be quite difficult to come up with some generic guidelines for people. And we'll be able to say what we've experienced with particular input decks, with particular codes. But it may be that even for a single code, you know, we're using different input decks. It will change the decision about whether you get best efficiency from OFI and UCX. And in terms of scale of differences, the biggest difference, at least I've seen so far in switching between them, other than the obvious OFI doesn't work, so you have to use UCX, which gives you sort of infinitely better performance, is I've seen a 20% performance difference when you switch to UCX from OFI, and probably switching from for a particular input deck on a particular code, and for switching from UCX to OFI when OFI is better, I've seen probably about 8 to 10% performance improvements with OFI over UCX for a different code with a different input deck. But we'll do our best to try and say what we've got in the documentation to try and help users out. But it really is, at the moment, I think, just worth trying on a small, on a representative test case to see what it means for your jobs, switching between these two different options. Somebody earlier asked about Slurm and the layout. So what we've added in Slurm for the full system is more functionality and flexibility than the full cab system. So we've got some new additions, obviously high memory, to be able to access high memory jobs. This task farm QoS, which gives the ability to run a larger number of smaller jobs, which was something a few people were struggling with on the full cabinet system, and the serial access as well to the data analysis nodes to allow you to upload data, do archiving of data, actual data transformations, and all that sort of stuff. Some additional changes are that the short QoS now supports jobs up to 32 nodes, up from an 8 load limit on the Ford cabinet. The standard QoS supports jobs up to 2048 nodes, up from the 256 node limit on the Ford cabinet. The large scale, which is for the largest jobs, supports jobs up to the full size of the system, which is the 250,000 cores, up from the 940 node limit on the 4 cabinet. Somebody asked about priorities before for larger jobs. The schedule is set up to enhance the priority of larger jobs to allow them to run at some point. But what we're always trying to do with the scheduler priorities is ensure that when the system is busy, right, there's always going to be pain for people if there's a high level of demand. What we try to do is make sure that pain's shared evenly across people, rather than being focused in one particular job class or one particular job size or one particular job length. The job lengths are still similar, Dario. So 20 minutes for short, standard QoS is 24 hours. There's a long QoS with 48 hours as well in a similar way. If you want more details on the particular QoSs that I can fit on a slide, go and look at the in the documentation in the scheduler section. There's a table of all the QoSs and what the limits are there. The reservations, we also support reservations to allow people to exceed the standard limits in particular cases where they really need that. Gavin's asked, will the large scale limits be reduced during the uncharged period? No, we're going to try and run as in production to gather statistics about how well the scheduler is working. Because one of the things here is this is not obviously not a final configuration. This is a first iteration of it, and we're always going to be looking at how the situation's going, what the different limits do, and looking to adjust and optimize the settings to make the system run as smoothly as possible to meet the requirements of the users on the system as smoothly as possible. So, you know, this is very much the schedule configuration is supposed to be dynamic, and we review it often and keep an eye on the queues. It's not quite a real situation if it's in charge. Yes, you're right, Andrew. But we'll start out with this, and we'll keep it under review and modify things as we need to for the system as it goes along. Just a quick example of MPI job. This is very similar to the 4 cabinet system. The only thing that's different from the 4 cabinet system really is the omission of the module load EPCC job end, which isn't needed anymore. So if you've got job scripts on the 4 cab system, you just need to remove that line and they'll work fine. They should work fine on the full system as well, in exactly the same way. I mentioned earlier we've also got the data analysis nodes at the moment. There's 2 of these, each with 128 cores. They've got the same processors as the compute nodes, and they've each got 512 gig of memory. The difference between these and the compute nodes is that they're shared access. Multiple users will be using these nodes at the same time. Access to these nodes is only through the scheduler. There's no way you can SSH directly into them other than using an S-run to launch an interactive job. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. On these nodes, you request cores and or memory, depending on what your requirements are. So each user can have a maximum of 32 cores, be they split across single core jobs, or be they one job with using 32 cores, or a maximum of 128 gigabytes of memory. If you don't ask for a particular amount of memory, you get 2 gig for every core you've asked for. If you ask for a specific amount of memory but don't specify cores, you get 1 core by default, zero by default. On these nodes, all of the file systems are available. That's homework and the RDF file systems. They also have external network access for data transfer, so you can run long-running data transfer tasks from these nodes. The jobs on them are uncharged, even when we get into the charge period, but you need a valid budget to be able to use those nodes. It is the way it's set up. Anyway. So an example job submission script, this asks for a single process and 4 gig of memory. You can see it says n tasks equals 1 and memory equals 4 gig, and you can run your serial executable. If you want an interactive shell where you can actually type the commands on the data analysis node rather than putting everything in a batch script, you can use this sort of S-run thing. This one's got the extra --X11 option to allow you to export the display back if you want to do some graphical work as well. But that, of course, assumes you've logged into ARCHER2 with X enabled using either the -X or the -Y option, and you've got a local X client installed on your system that you're viewing the data on. So that's where we are with most of the new things. It's a quick tour. There's much more information. There's more information available in the migration guide and much more information available in the user and best practice guide, which has already been updated to include details for both the 4-cabinet system and the full system. So you can go and look at that as well if you want more information. Our future plans on the service obviously are the addition of the solid state storage. I didn't put the GPU nodes on here, Gavin, because I have no idea when they're coming at the moment. I know that the solid state storage is physically in Edinburgh and cabled up to the system, but it does need some work to configure it to be linked into Slurm and to allow users to use it. And that's the bit of work that still needs to be done there. As I mentioned, we're going to continue the optimization of the Slurm configuration based on production use statistics. Obviously, during the uncharged period, it's maybe a bit different, and we will be sensitive to that and make changes as required to keep things moving and to make sure that it's balanced across what different users need from the system. We've got a few bits and pieces of work still to do because we've only had a short amount of time really to test on the system and to get it up and running to provide some more useful information for users. So, for example, looking at the comparative performance of different compilers, you could be aware there's the free compiler suites on the system. What advice can we provide for users there? Comparative performance of OFI versus UCX. I mentioned that we've started some work there, but there's still a lot more that needs done. We're doing some work with containers as well, both in terms of generic containers that are portable between systems. So they're sort of generic mpitch containers for running parallel jobs either on ARCHER2 or on another system that supports mpitch. But we're also part of an evaluation with HPE, where they provide the programming environment in a container. So rather than having to log into a HPE system to be able to compile and maybe even test at a small scale, you could use containers to do that and be able to compile using Docker as part of CI workflow, or even evaluate new versions of the programming environment before they're available. And sorry, somebody did ask about also about porting, and I did want to mention something about that, even though I don't have a specific slide. I don't have a specific slide on that. Our experience as a CSE team and the testing we've done so far is that if you take a binary from the 4-cabinet system and just copy it across to the full system, it just works and gives good performance generally. And there have been a few cases where things have gone wrong, and recompiling fixes that. But in general, binaries that work on the 4-cabinet system should just work on the full system, and just by taking them across, and because they're dynamically linked, they'll pick up the new versions of the libraries on the system and just use those. Mike's asking any guidance on for porting projects should use the default or 29 or try both. The test that we've done shows there's not much performance difference between either of them. One thing that 2109 does have in it is GCC 11. So if you want to test with a really very modern in HPC terms, GCC compiler, because GCC syntax and options and compatibility changes quite quickly, then 2109 is a useful place to test if you've got any worries about compatibility with more modern versions of GCC. There's always a trade-off in terms of, you may get some better performance from the newer versions compared to, using the default versions. If you've got time to check, then it's always, I would not discourage people from checking, but our initial tests at least show there's not a huge amount between them. And so, if you do use the default one, you shouldn't be worried that you're throwing away lots of performance on the system. At some point, I think the more modern versions will become the default. We have no plans for that, at least during the first initial part of access. We want to see how people get on the system before we start changing things. But I would imagine that next year sometime, for example, we'll be thinking about we'll be looking to update the default program environment to a more modern version and go forward that way. So it's useful to have these previews on the system before we move forward. So I'm sort of at the end now of what I wanted to say. The summary I've heard here is mostly around the logistics side of things rather than the differences. In the user access full system plan week beginning 22nd of November, we're very hopeful and reasonably confident now that it will be actually on the Monday at the start of the day, if at all possible, unless something catastrophic goes wrong in the next couple of days. Jobs will be on charge for at least 30 days following full system access. The 4-cabinet system will also be available for at least those 30 days, and we'll notify people with at least 2 weeks' notice before either the 4-cabinet system goes away or charging comes onto the main system. Your existing credentials just work when you access the new system. Your home directory is shared, so any data you've got in the home file systems will be available straight away. There's separate work file systems, and you can copy data across. You only need one thing that wasn't highlighted was that you only need a single credential to copy between the systems, and that's your password. So you won't need a key on ARCHER2 4-cab or on ARCHER2. And the RDF as a service file system shared by system. And Stephen's right as well. He points out in the chat that actually it's more than just your key has been copied across. The two systems share an authentication service. So it is actually the same password. So if you change your password on one of the systems, it changes for both the systems. And the same's true of keys. If you enable a key on one system, it'll be available on the other system as well. And because they use the same underlying authentication database to allow access on the system. So Joe and I are finished there. So happy to take any more questions from people. Yeah, so as if we still have a max 64 job limit per user in the queue and a limit on number of nodes per user. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, so I don't want to say the wrong thing. If you look at the user guide, it has the details for each of the QoSs in terms of the job limits. Okay, so please go and look there rather than trust my memory. Okay, and we're going to continue our testing, and we're going to note any exceptions, any issues we find in the known issues sections. Andrew asks about changes to het jobs. Yeah, so one thing I didn't mention there, is that there's been a change in the way in the syntax for running npmd jobs that share an MPI communicator. So actually what's happened, my understanding anyway, Andrew, is what happened is that it's gone back to looking something more like it used to on Archer when you used AP run, where each of the separate executables were separated by a colon in the line. So you now have srun, first executable and options, colon, second executable options, and so on and so forth. So it looks much more like the actual npmd that was used to be used on Archer with AP run, and that the specifying it through the batch hex jobs thing has gone away now. Mark asks, will there be a period of disruption in a few months with the 4 cabinet spliced onto the full system? So there will be a period when the work file system that's on the 4 cabinet will be disconnected from the 4 cabinet system. We shut down the work file. This is the current plan, right? Everything's off in the distance, so things are subject to change. But the current working assumption is the 4 cabinet system will be shut down, the work file system disconnected, and that work file system will be reconnected to provide additional storage on the full system. Okay. Of course, a downtime will be minimized as much as possible, but I suspect there will be at least a short amount of downtime, at least not for most of the work, but at least the final bit of recabling to attach that work file system into the full system. Yeah, there's no plan at the moment to have the 4 cabinets from the 4 cabinet system into the full system. Julia asks, sorry, can you use need to recompile code to the new system and reinstall models? So our experience is that binaries compiled on the 4 cabinet work fine if taken over onto the full system. Now that's not a guarantee that that they will definitely work, and if you run into problems with binaries, then you should recompile as your first thing that you try. But we've generally found that the vast majority of binaries, if you take them from the 4 cabinet system, just work well on the full system. Andrew's asking, if the full system isn't available, when we can have access to the front end and the file system to start transferring. Our full expectation is the full system is going to be available on the Monday. If there's something so catastrophic in the next couple of days that means the full system's not available on the Monday, Tuesday, then that's going to affect login access as well. So we're not going to. So you know, so it is a bit of an all or nothing approach at the moment. But you know, I mean, with the journey we've had with ARCHER2, I hesitate to say I've got really high confidence that it's going to be available, but I think I do have pretty good confidence now that it's going to be available on the Monday. You know, I'm pretty yeah. You know, you always feel like you're setting yourself up for a fall when you see things like that. But you know, we do have good confidence the system will be available on Monday morning to all users. Now, there's no reason why this wouldn't be the case. I don't think.
So thank you all for attending this webinar introducing the new ARCHER2 full system. And as always, if you've got any follow-up questions or running into any issues, please do not hesitate to contact the ARCHER2 service desk. Thank you all for coming along and being part of this webinar.